Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Riverdale. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, there's many different moving pieces. Obviously, you got the convict situation being what it is. Let's first and foremost focus on Penelope, which I think is interesting, because she's become like a ministry since she was in prison. She kind of started her own little kind of like religion type of thing, and it turns out like the moment she started mentioning a son that died, I'm like, did you? And it's like, Jason? And it's like, oh yeah, she built an entire religion. Well, at least him kind of at the centerfold. I don't know what we're going to go as far as saying she straight up built an entire religion around Jason. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense in a certain regard, because she's trying to make sense of Jason's death, like all in that time. And I mean, to be fair, like that's what Cheryl's been struggling with the entire time. So actually there is some common ground that her and her mom have not had in a long time. And I thought, but it was like, first and foremost, I was like, oh, this is coming off a little cult-like. But then I'm like, oh, I mean, Riverdale's had its share of cults, whether it be like the farm of Edgar or the, the whole Gargoyle King thing, which, I mean, hell, Penelope was behind that. So like, but I'm like, I don't think this is like some like scam. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe Penelope hasn't changed too much and this is but I'd like to believe that this is her legitimately trying to like help other people while also kind of helping herself, giving people something to kind of fight for, like helping Riverdale actually get rebuilt spiritually. And I think it will potentially help with the whole her and Cheryl's relationship. I mean, because to be fair, like, because Cheryl kind of pointed out, like, right, it's because of you I actually don't believe in, like, you know, it's like when we die, we just rot. I mean, and she's like, you don't really believe that. It's like, yeah, Mom, you, like, legitimately screwed with me, like, with the whole Jason and the whole Julian doll thing. So, like, yeah, you destroyed my faith in believing that there's anything beyond us just rotting. But, like, during, like, one of those ceremonies, she sees Jason, and I think that probably restored her faith in, like, no, there is something beyond that. There is something more, you know? So, like I said, I think it's going to be an interesting development on that front, because I think it will potentially bridge the gap that's been between Penelope and Cheryl for years, for the entire series, because they've always had the very cantankerous relationship that they've had. So, maybe this could be the way for them to mend. I think a lot of this season is going to be about mending a lot of relationships and a lot of connections between people in certain regards. On one facet of this episode, we have the whole Betty working with Tabitha to find Jughead, which obviously she has her reservations, because it's like, Jughead's not my problem anymore. We haven't dated in so long, and their relationship being cantankerous as it is, very complicated. And I thought it was interesting what that storyline went, because it's the three women in Jughead's life. It ends up being Betty, Tabitha, and his ex Jessica from New York. And it's like, the fact she was so gun-ho to join, I was like, I mean, to be fair, I know you dropped by Riverdale to drop off some drugs and everything was good, so it's like, but it's like an on again, off again relationship, so I guess that kind of fits the kind of destructive pattern that they have. But I was like, what is she after? Because I was like, well, I know she said that Jughead owed her money, so she was looking all over the place. I'm like, is she actually looking for like the money? Like, what's up with that? And it turns out she was actually looking for the manuscript, which Betty had the entire time. And so later on, she justifies it by being like, I want the manuscript because Jughead basically used you as the premise for one of his books. So like, I want to make sure that some of the stuff that went down in our relationship doesn't end up being like in a best-selling novel or something like that. I don't want, because obviously Betty has to deal with kind of being villainized. Granted, I mean, people who are in the know, I mean, that's the whole point of like his books too. Like everyone from Riverdale being like, screw you, Jughead, you wrote about us. It's like, so it's like, yeah, people outside of Riverdale don't know, but everyone within Riverdale, the people in your inner circle, are like, oh, I know who you're referencing and who you're talking about. So I think it's kind of that same vein. But part of me is like, is Jessica being very forthright? Because I'm like, did she actually just take the manuscript just to take the manuscript? Because she said it herself, she's a writer. So I'm like, is she going to take it and jostle some stuff around and make it her own? Yeah, I was like, I don't know. Because from what we heard about, it sounds like Mole Man and Mothman. So a lot of stuff that's kind of going down in Riverdale about the like alien / Mothman. That plus just his own like crazy spiral. Like, we never really got into the ins and outs of like what else was in that book beyond what Betty mentioned in that regard. But But obviously Betty talks about, because Jessica brings up like, oh, you know, you're the infamous Betty. The fact of the matter is, Jughead kind of told me a little bit like, right, you sleeping with Archie, like, his best friend, his brother, and it's like, oh, and you know, Betty's like, sure, it's okay, you know, yes, I've made my mistakes, but it's easy for Jughead to try and paint himself as like victimless in this. It's like, you know, it's any relationship. There, it takes two to tango, and there's always that thing of like, you know, I know that person. I've done that where like there were points in my life where I blamed my ex, and I'm like, in retrospect, I'm like, yeah, you know, I had my own faults to play in it, probably more so than I was willing to realize at the time. But now I'm older, I'm like, oh yeah, like I messed up a lot. I didn't handle things the best way in that relationship. So I'm like, I totally get that, where it's just like you have a very like certain perspective on things, especially because I think for Jughead, it's like, you know, him and Betty, it was supposed to be endgame like Veronica and Archie were. It's interesting considering Archie and Veronica are finding their ways back to each other, even though they're complicated circumstances. Whether that be a case for Betty and Jughead, who knows? But he left that message for her like 2 years ago. He even told Tabitha like, oh, like you're like Betty, like you're a fun killer or something like that. So it's like, yeah, but to be fair, like Jughead is kind of going through, which isn't to justify it, but I'm just saying, like, yeah, he is not in his right mind. He hasn't been good for these past 7 years. Because let's also not forget, like, apparently, at least for the first year anniversary, he was also the only one that showed up. Once again, we don't know about the following 6 anniversaries where someone else might have showed up and he didn't, or maybe I think he only, because he said, like, yeah, it won't be until like 7 years until we saw each other. It'll be 6 more years until we saw each other again. But I'm like, we don't know, like, whether, like I said, maybe year 3 anniversary, maybe Veronica came and no one else did, or maybe Jughead just came the once and no one just, maybe it's like, right, no one showed up for this anniversary, or it could be a thing of, like, maybe he showed up for the first few and that led to some dark spiraling he went through in New York. I don't know. We still haven't really dived into that. Like, we only are aware of the first anniversary, the first year of the time skip that he, like, went there, but beyond that we don't know. So I did think it was interesting that Jessica went through the trouble of drugging them. It's like, because they were like, yeah, she's like, oh, maybe we should get high and like follow, retrace Jughead. So it's like, yeah, this lady's up to something. Why does it? And it's like, once again, it's about the manuscript. So that was interesting. And actually kind of, it's like, nah, you guys just go ahead and like let the waves kind of wash over you and kind of enjoy it. And by the time like Betty and Tabitha kind of came out of it, by the time Betty and Tabitha had come out of it, like, it's like, wait, she's like, wait, did I give Jessica Jughead's manuscript? Yeah, and you play the infamous message. She's like, oh, God. I guess she was kind of already a little high at the time. Well, because she hadn't really, I think they had started eating potentially at the time. And it's like, yeah, once again, it's like, yeah, Jughead's definitely got his own darkness. I mean, considering his family circumstances, and then, Betty kind of knows all about darkness too. Just, I think hers hasn't spiraled. I mean, it sent her spiraling in the past, but I don't think I don't think she's kind of in this spiraling phase like Jughead is. To be fair, there was something in Jughead's past in New York that he doesn't remember, but he's trying to confront. And so, I don't know. It's interesting, too, what Jughead's whole circumstances were, too, where the fact is that because I couldn't tell whether that was, like, really real, or was that, like, from Jughead's story, like, the whole, like, Sketch Alley Doc thing, because at first, like, him getting beat up and being saved by that dude, and it's like, oh, yeah, my name's Doc, and it's like, and then when they flash back to that story he told to that, back in season 4, and I was like, that's interesting, like, that's why I was like, Doc apparently got the life beat out of him, so I was like, he's dead, right? So I was like, is this all in Jughead's head, or is this part of the story? He even went to the point of saying, like, no, I was taking mushrooms. I'm like, wait, once again, is this part of the story, or is this actually happening? It's still kind of unclear, because I don't know whether it's a thing of, like, this is all, like, in Jughead's, like, fevered, like, off bender of, like, being on drugs, like, whether it was just, like, him trying to make up for one of his greatest shames of, like, right, I didn't do anything when those businessmen came and beat the crap out of Doc. And it's like, I don't know whether it's supposed to be like like Doc didn't die but was alive and now Jughead found his way back there, or whether that was just all in his head, but he was just kind of like, I think I want to say it is legitimate, like, that part is just in his head where it's like, nah, like, Jughead, you didn't, I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't know. Like I said, because the way Jughead said it was like beat the life out of him, but it's like, maybe at the time, and maybe even with that refresher, I was under the context and belief that it's like, oh, like, Doc died, but maybe he didn't. And maybe it's just like, Jughead's just regret was like, I didn't do anything for him. But he was like, he's like, Jughead. It's like, I know. He's like, you knew? It's like, yeah, but I figured you had your reasons for not saying anything. Because it's been so long and he's older now, so he's just like, oh, I'm Henry. You probably don't remember, so I'm able to just lie and say my name's Henry. But it's like, no, I remember your Jughead. And it's like, the fact of the matter is, he's basically giving Jughead, like, you need to, like, go and face whatever it is. You have to, like, if you kind of want to move on. And Jughead takes that advice and goes back to New York, which is going to be interesting if he gets back to New York, which we'll get to in a second. But it's like, there's going to be the whole Jessica thing waiting. Once again, we'll find out probably then whether or not there's validity to the whole thing of like, right, I need to find out if he wrote about me in his story. It's like, I mean, Betty and Tabitha read enough to the story, be like, I wonder, is there anything in there for them to be like, could that be associated with Jessica, or are we just not thinking straight at the time? Whatever the case may be, but I'm curious what it is that went down in New York that he's blacking out. Because like, until he deals with that darkness, like, that darkness is just going to stay welled up inside of him until he finally confronts it and figures out what happened. But he gets picked up by a trucker, and you're immediately like, okay, so Jughead potentially could be in the same position as Polly, as well as all the missing girls, which Tabitha, says that she's going to help Betty with that, because she's like, I appreciate, like, the fact is that you're willing to do all this for, like, the missing girls and everything. I want to help out. But they got Jughead's message that he had left, so it's sad. The timing's just terrible. Like, as he's coming out of his high, like, from his, like, his break, they were on theirs, so they didn't get the message until kind of too late. So who knows? Hopefully it's just like, oh, maybe it's just a good-natured person and not the truck driving serial killer that's been a part of everything. Unfortunately, it's probably going to be the latter, but we'll have to wait and see on that front. Other than that, obviously, Riverdale High still trashed from the convicts breaking free, so they need to get some money necessary to fix up the school, but obviously not in a position until Hiram and the governor put out a bounty for everyone that was released. So it's like Archie feels like that's the best opportunity to make some money. So him, Thane, Kevin, obviously we're working with Sheriff Killer until he gets captured later on, because the Dickinsons as well as Ted make their returns, and they're out for a lot more. Obviously taking Hiram hostage, because apparently, like, him and the governor had this deal about the prison, and it's like, oh, there's something buried beneath it. It's like, oh, so was that like, I wonder, did he know that when he built the prison and took over and everything, or was it more like, oh, it was something he found out in this time skip of like, oh, there's potentially some stuff beneath the prison, because it makes you wonder just how far in advance, like, Hiram has been planning this. I mean, for him, it's like, this is something he's put his blood, sweat, and tears and dedicated his life to. Kind of made sacrifices when it came to his family, because where him and Hermione stand, also where him and his own daughter stand, why he's become even more villainous in the time skip is like, yeah, I'm sure it's related to all of this, where it's just kind of like, this is my project. I'm not, I'm sure, like, it's just kind of like, for one, it's his middle finger to Riverdale for everything, because it's like all that Riverdale, every time I'm trying to do something for Riverdale, it's kind of backlash and blown up in my face. So, you know what? Just burn this place to the ground, or rather just demolish it, whatever the case may be. It's just interesting, because, like, also, like, it's like, oh, Reggie, it's like, well, why are you working for my dad? It's like, well, my dad owed him, so I was working off his debt. But also, it's like, being a bad guy pays, which sadly in certain cases it does, which I also appreciate them dropping, like, DC reference after DC reference of being like, oh, my dad's literally Lex Luthor, and then later on Archie's like, oh, we'll come down like Batman. I was like, I love the double back-to-back DC references like that. But this is also about, Veronica getting what she needs as well, obviously paying off all the, like, debts her husband got, because that's the only way she's going to be able to get a divorce, because she's being blackmailed in a situation. Obviously, for legal reasons, she can't tell Archie and all that, so it just kind of makes it seem like, oh, so this divorce thing isn't right. Until you and Chad get divorced, like, there can't be an us. I guess it's also because like I think for Archie it's like right because if I've already kind of been down that complicated route and it's like it's like that's kind of unfair to both of us if like because it's just going to be because it's always going to feel like I have both feet in, you kind of have 1 foot in 1 foot out. Like it always be like that. Plus also it's like getting caught up in an affair type of situation could like have like disastrous effects and just lead to major complications. So it's like it's like right, like let it be completely settled before we pick up what we're doing. But Darla and her son end up stealing not only jewelry from Veronica, but also like the opal that she's going to use to settle a lot of debts. I wonder will it be enough? Or will Chad just keep like digging deeper and deeper just because he doesn't want to let Veronica go and just using it as an excuse to keep her? I mean, not even necessarily because of love. I mean, it could be love, obsession disguised as love, or it could just be like I just want to have power over you and I don't want to let you go in that regard. So borderlining obsession, but like maybe it just mainly stems from power, but obviously they're holding Hiram hostage, and there's Hiram, the governor, as well as Sheriff Keller, which I'm immediately like, do you think if it wasn't the governor and Sheriff Keller, would Veronica have been like, well, once again, it's always a flip-flopping, like, no matter how much of a villain her dad is, it's still like, you're my dad, so I do love you, so I'm like, would she be more inclined to be like, kind of do whatever you want to, he's not that good of a person, but Veronica did, obviously having Reggie's help as well as like, Fang, Archie, Kevin, as well as Uncle Frank helping out as well, because by capturing these bad guys, it could also help bolster like his chances of getting like, his sentence reduced or like, him kind of getting on a good behavior type of situation. So obviously motivates them even more to help capture the bad guys. But luckily everything kind of goes down without a hitch. Also, like, Archie getting the final blow was pretty badass. It's kind of like, I don't know if you consider it a Superman punch, but the jump to the side and just, like, punching Ted in the face, like, yeah, kind of getting Ted back for, like, the bathroom brawl last time. So it's like, yeah, coming out on top. I mean, to be fair, all of them had to kind of join together to take that sucker down. But the governor did decide, like, right, he's going to sign off on because of what Frank did, and he's going to be kind of set free. So, which I'm curious, is Frank going to be sticking around Riverdale more, or is he going to move on as well? I don't know. Kind of still filling that fatherly role that he kind of did, kind of filling in that Fred gap a little bit, like he kind of had previously. Like, will he still kind of play that role or not? Yeah, you also have, like I said, Hiram with the whole situation with the polonium light being like, yeah, I'm not going to give that up, so you need to go back to your mansion and just, like, leave me alone, or basically put a fake gun to his head, being like, oh, like, or I will, kill you. It could end very disastrously for you, so still not, well, we know what he's got planned, but once again, like I said, we don't know, like, how far in advance, like, Hiram had planned this all out. Like, was this always the goal? Is this goal shifted over the years? Like what? We're still like in the dark about just like what went down for everyone in this time skip. Like even in him in particular, like what happened to make him? Like I said, he was already a villain, but it feels like he leaned into it. Like he is definitely on his Lex Luthor type of journey right now. So it's gonna be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.